Hey everyone, welcome to This Explainer. If you're running a local business, or honestly, if you just want to understand the invisible forces that are actively driving our economy right now, you are absolutely in the right place. Today, we're going to break down exactly how global energy shocks hit your local bottom line. I'm going to take my economist hat, look at the big macroeconomic forces of global energy markets, and translate them directly into the microeconomic realities that you're facing every single day. Let's jump in. So think about this. Most modern cities, they only have about a 3-day food supply on hand. Imagine waking up tomorrow morning and finding fuel stations completely empty. Flights are canceled. And most importantly for you, your entire supply chain is just completely frozen. Food prices, freight costs, exploding overnight. It sounds like a massive natural disaster, right? But the thing is, history and economics show us that this level of chaos doesn't require an earthquake or a hurricane. It literally just requires a disruption to one single global commodity, oil. Okay, here is the agenda for our briefing today. We're going to cover the Global Business Foundation, the 1973 historical warning, triggers of an oil shock, the inflation domino effect, and finally, the impact on Main Street. All right, starting off with Section 1, the Global Business Foundation. You know, it is so easy to think of oil as just the gasoline you pump into your car, but it is so much more than that. It is, quite literally, the lifeblood of the entire global economy. Think about the massive international freight ships transporting your retail goods across the oceans, or the heavy industrial machines manufacturing your inventory. Even the plastics you use for packaging, the medicines sitting in our pharmacies, and the fertilizers that produce our food supply, they are all heavily dependent on petroleum. If this foundation shakes, well, every single layer of global commerce shakes right along with it. Which brings us to Section 2, the 1973 historical warning. To understand our vulnerability today, we actually have to look back. Prior to 1973, the world's reliance on Middle Eastern oil reserves was growing exponentially. Then, political tensions flared up, and several Arab oil-producing countries suddenly halted their exports to Western allies. The result? Within weeks, fuel prices absolutely skyrocketed. You had these massive panic lines forming at gas stations everywhere. And months later, economies worldwide were suffering deeply as this unprecedented global shock really set in. This historical event is a huge warning. It proves that a sudden geopolitical shift by just a handful of nations can instantly trigger global economic suffering. And this quote right here brilliantly illustrates our core vulnerability. A small group of oil-producing nations really could shake the entire global economy. The big lesson from 1973 is that our dependency on highly concentrated energy reserves creates massive systemic risk for local economies worldwide. You really don't need a global war to crash an economy. You just need a disruption right at the source. Let's move on to Section 3, triggers of an oil shock. So looking across the globe today, our current risk profile is basically fraught with bottlenecks. Take the Strait of Hormuz near Iran, for instance. It carries a massive percentage of the world's daily oil shipments. Just one naval conflict or blocked route there, that means an instant explosion in global oil prices. We've also seen how sanctions on Russia following the war in Ukraine triggered a worldwide surge in fuel and food costs as energy markets were thrown into total chaos. Meanwhile, you have China's rapidly expanding energy consumption, creating dangerous competition over limited resources. And historically, United States military interventions in the Middle East have also caused disruptions to stable global energy supplies. The takeaway here is that any conflict involving these major players acts as a direct bottleneck, threatening global commerce on a daily basis. Now, for decades, everyone was terrified that we were going to physically run out of oil, right? But the crucial point here, and this is super important, we don't need to physically run out of oil to face a crisis. Today, the immediate threat is political instability. Things like wars, trade conflicts, terror attacks, or sanctions alone, they can freeze your supply chain long before the wells ever run dry. Okay, let's look at Section 4, the inflation domino effect. As an economist looking at small businesses, I can tell you this is probably the most vital sequence to understand. This is the domino effect of a recession. Step 1, a distant geopolitical conflict disrupts the supply. Step 2, global fuel prices spike almost overnight because the market panics. Step 3, because oil literally powers the world, freight, transportation, and factory power costs immediately rise. And finally, Step 4, broad economic inflation hits consumer goods. This step-by-step process shows exactly how a distant naval skirmish literally forces a local business owner like you to raise consumer prices just to survive. In economics, we call this energy-driven inflation. It's defined as the rapid spread of rising costs through transportation, food, and electricity triggered by a sudden disruption in fossil fuel supplies. When energy gets expensive, everything gets expensive, from commercial air travel all the way down to the basic agricultural fertilizer used to grow our food. It becomes costly. This type of inflation, it doesn't just isolate itself to the gas pump, it spreads like wildfire across the entire society. Finally, let's bring it all home with Section 5, Impact on Main Street. This is exactly where the macro event collides with your micro reality. A blocked trade route thousands of miles away that doesn't just stay in the evening news. It directly translates into higher overhead costs for you. If you run a local bakery, your flour costs more to deliver, your ovens cost more to run, and your packaging becomes way more expensive. If you own a hardware store, your inventory shipping costs start eating entirely into your profit margins. You're forced into price hikes, not because you want to charge your customers more, but because global energy disruption mandates it. And we really must remember the severe human cost behind all these economic terms. Oil crises deeply impact the everyday citizens who make up your customer base. Families suddenly struggle to afford basic daily fuel, leaving them with way less disposable income to spend at your business. Factories might shut down, causing local workers to lose their jobs. Farmers are hit with higher premiums for transportation and fertilizer. Ultimately, small businesses face crushing operating costs and widespread economic panic. Energy really is connected to economic survival itself. Now, you might be sitting there thinking, well, aren't we fixing this? What about solar power and electric vehicles? And yes, governments and companies are investing heavily in renewables to reduce this exact vulnerability. However, the reality is that this complex transition to cleaner energy systems could take decades. Oil still heavily dominates aviation, shipping, and heavy industry. And until that transition is fully complete, our current business operations remain highly exposed to these global shocks. Which leaves us with this final critical thought. The modern world, and by extension your local business, was built on oil. As global competition for these resources grows more intense by the day, we really have to ask ourselves, are we ready? Will the next great global crisis begin at a gas station? Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. I really hope this structured look at energy economics gives you a much clearer understanding of the forces shaping our world and your bottom line. Keep learning, stay focused, and I will see you next time.